The state receives a budget snapshot.
We have an opportunity to do this project right.
And the public weighs in on the stadium debate. Next in Capitol Report. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's Capitol Report. I'm Julie Bartkey. On November 2nd, GOP leaders called for the public to weigh in on a new People's Stadium. 22 days later, the first of those hearings got underway. Nearly 4 hours of testimony to the Joint Senate Taxes and Local Government and Elections Committees resulted in several game plans revealed on stadium site options and the suggestion that the team engage in site discussions with the city of Minneapolis.
If you asked us to simply in a vacuum choose a site, we would choose one. It would be the Metronome, and I'll get into that in a second. But we believe that it's very important to have the Vikings at the table. We have not been in negotiations with the Vikings. We want the Vikings to be partners in narrowing those sites. I can tell you how we look at the sites, and if you really felt it was important for us to make that decision without the Vikings at the table, we would obviously respond to that request.
I wonder, can you just comment about what the mayor said, that the Vikings have not been in any kind of discussions or conversations with the city of Minneapolis about their sites or proposals?
First, let me say we have a great deal of respect for Mayor Ryback, Council President Johnson. We appreciate the city leaders stepping forward. This is a very difficult issue to show leadership and step up and say we want to solve this issue. We want the Vikings. And so we're grateful for the city and for their leadership to step up on a very difficult issue. But as mentioned in our testimony, we followed the path that was prescribed. The Vikings followed the path that was prescribed to them. We worked hard to find a local partner. Ramsey County stood up, said we want the Vikings. They've been a great partner. We've had months of negotiations with Ramsey County. We had more than a year of due diligence of the Arden Hills site, with expending significant resources on some of our state's top real estate, environmental, and traffic engineers. And so this site has been vetted. We have reviewed the renovated Metrodome proposal, and we have reviewed the dome plan in the past. And we've done some due diligence there, but we've done extreme due diligence on the Arden Hills site. We think it's important that we stick with a local partner that sticks with us, and we're doing our best to honor our agreement with our willing partner, Ramsey County.
But I think it would help us in the legislature if you were to meet with Minneapolis to help them, from your perspective, narrow down which of their proposed sites might be more viable in terms of the Vikings' point of view. As I said to the mayor, it's very hard for us as legislators to look at all these potential sites and decide which one might be the best or propose one site over the other without your input. And so at this point, we're not asking you necessarily to partner with Minneapolis, but at least to give them your input, cooperate with them, assist them in identifying the best site for Minneapolis to propose if they're going to propose one. I would encourage you to do that. I think members here would appreciate that.
The chief author of the Senate Stadium bill, Senator Julie Rosen, joins me to talk about Tuesday's hearing. Thank you for coming on Capitol Report.
Thank you, Julie. You bet. It's always a pleasure.
Always a pleasure to have you as well. And I want to begin with your statement at the beginning of the hearing saying that you believe some good information would be garnered. So it's over. What's your impression of what you heard?
Well, first off, I really want to thank leadership and the committee chairs for having this hearing. It was needed. We need to have a public opinion. We need to get everybody at the table. And you cannot move forward with such a big project like this without having everybody at the table. And I think that was first and foremost is getting the correct information out and then having the public the opportunity to discuss some of this stuff too. The piece of information that was new to me was the Vikings agreement to let the authority operate the stadium. That was all new revelation that must have happened in the last 24 hours. So that was good. That was good because that is definitely one of the sticking points of this whole stadium talk.
And there have been a few sticking points. I want to talk to you about Senator Bach's statement during the hearing that this bill is going to be a tough sell. It'll be tough to get 34 votes. Now, as the author of the bill, how do you navigate through these murky waters?
Well, you have to navigate with partners that are across the aisle, and a governor who thankfully understands this and really wants to get something done too. That's how you navigate. You could not do it alone as a lone Republican or a lone Democrat or a lone governor. You have to navigate together.
I want to ask you, I talked with Senator John Marty, and that segment will be on shortly, and off camera he was saying that in his opinion this is less of a partnering and more of, there just hasn't been a whole lot of negotiations. It's been more the team saying what they needed. What's your impression of that statement?
Well, unfortunately, Senator Marty is not involved in the daily conversations and the working group, the bipartisan working group from both bodies and across the aisle that has been working on this for a very long time. So it may appear that there is a lot of just the team dictating what they need, but it really, trust me, there is so many negotiations and so many different, you have Minneapolis now coming in, and they've got their sites and their bill and their proposal, and so we're bringing many people to the table, and it's not really the team that's dictating. We know what the team wants. We have to figure out what the state share is going to be and the local partner is going to be. And
as you just said, you know what the team wants. They want the site in Arden Hills. They remain steadfast in that support as the bill author. And we also heard about several site opportunities in Minneapolis as well. So as the chief author, are you site neutral, or do you have a preference as well?
Well, I like to say I'm site agnostic, absolutely, because I just need a bill that works for everybody, and that's what's going to happen. And I'm sure in the very end, nobody's going to be jumping up and down, and if they were, then that's cause for concern. It's going to be a bill and a funding mechanism that works, and that we can get our votes, the 34 votes that we need, and we move this along. So that's my goal.
The hearing on December 6th is supposed to delve mostly in the different financing options. So for the sake of argument, let's talk about some of those. Do you think you could perhaps get some votes, more senators on board, if perhaps more of the revenue from the team eventually went into the general fund as well, say from parking spots? That was one concern that was brought up in today's hearing.
Right. Well, it all comes. You've got site locations and various price tags on those site locations, and then you have the funding mechanisms and many different options there, many different problems with each one of these funding mechanisms. So, you know, it's trying to move both of them succinctly along and not really saying, okay, we're going to do this site that has this issue without really knowing how it's going to be funded. So it's, you know, it's a work in progress. That's about all I can say, but we are making agreements. We've come actually a very long way. It maybe doesn't appear to be that way, but we all agree that a referendum, releasing the referendum from Ramsey County, is not going to work. And I think that was a very sensible agreement. So now we have to kind of start over and figure out, okay, if we're not going to let a sales tax increase go in Ramsey County, what's the other options? And actually some things came up today in the hearing. Senator Ortman, the chair, mentioned bonding, and we've talked about that in the past. I think that's something we need to talk further, but it's good to hear these various talking points or issues come up from somebody else besides this little small working group or just myself and the other author in the House.
Senator Rosen, I think it's very fair to say that you are working very hard on a very contentious issue. With some NFL stadiums going up with no public funding whatsoever, I want to ask you, why do you think it's important for the state to be a partner in this?
Well, because it is a people's stadium, and I think the governor coined that very, very well. And Fairmont, my hometown, was just at the there on last Saturday. They unfortunately lost, but it is a people's stadium and it's used, and there should be a commitment. Of course, the Twin Stadium, there was no state share in that, and sometimes we get compared to that, but that's not very fair. We as a state use that Metrodome right now continuously. The Hmong Festival, I mean, you could go on and on. What other events are there? So the partner has to be, the state needs to commit to this, and we need to figure out something and put a viable bill on the table so the NFL and the Vikings can all say, well, I don't like it, but it's a pretty good deal for everybody, so let's go ahead with it.
What does your instinct tell you about this bill, about the creation and the presenting of a final package to the legislature?
My instincts tell me that I believe we're going to get it done, because this issue is not going away, Julie. It is not going to go away, and I feel that if we don't deal with it now, we're going to get cobbled up into hearings that are dealing with bonding and all these other issues. You know, the budget that's coming out. We need to have this wrapped up fairly soon, and we need to start counting our votes in a very bipartisan way. We need to get the governor engaged. He has been, but that's going to ramp up also, I'm sure. And my instincts say we're going to have a bill that we can vote on.
Okay. On that note, thank you for joining us today. And of course, we'll track this legislation as it's created and presented. Thanks again.
Yeah, thank you, Julie. You bet.
Dedicated money that goes directly to clean water, parks and trails, outdoor and cultural heritage programs, known as legacy funds, was the focus of a legislative audit. Members received an overview of ongoing concerns related to the 2008 voter-approved amendment.
One early and continuing challenge is to simply understand some of the language in the legacy amendment itself. For example, what constitutes cultural heritage? And what does it mean when the legacy amendment says that legacy money must be spent to supplement and not to substitute for traditional sources of funding? We spent a lot of time on this issue, frankly, trying to come to some more definitive conclusion that we could offer, not only you, but to the agencies, because they're struggling too to know how to comply with this provision, because they are required to comply as well. This is something that was put in clearly in the last appropriations bill, I think by the initiative of Representative Erdahl, to make sure that it's not only something that is imposed on the legislature in the appropriations process, but all recipients of legacy money have to show due diligence in justifying and documenting their use of this legacy money.
He has consistently opposed of any public financing for the stadium. Senator John Marty joins me now to talk about the hearing. And Senator, were there any arguments that perhaps swayed you differently than your prior thoughts on this topic?
No, I think there's a lot of good discussion, but nothing that was going to sway me into thinking that all of a sudden the public should fork over $700 million. No, nothing like that. I think it was interesting testimony. I think some of the most interesting was the guy who used to work at the Met Council 30, 40 years ago and talking about how you strategically ought to figure out where a stadium should be located, who's paying for it, how much you're paying for it, and so on. And he said, you know, this time basically we've got the Vikings telling us where they want it, how much we're going to pay for it, and everything else. And people seem to be just saying, okay, that's the way it has to be.
Senator, you began the hearing by stating the question, why should the state help pay for a stadium? I'm going to reverse that and ask you, why not?
Bottom line is it's a private business, a very profitable private business. Not as profitable as the Dallas Cowboys and some other teams, but they're making a lot of money. They've tripled their value, they're quadrupled their value in the last 10 years or so. And you know, private businesses, it's not the role of the state government. Our Constitution does not say it's the role of us to subsidize private businesses. We ought to be working the way Los Angeles and other communities are to pull together private financing for a football stadium.
The hearing on December 6th is going to delve a bit more into the financing positions of the different sites. I want to ask you a little bit, though, about the profitability, and, you know, it's a private entity, as you just stated. Lester Bagley from the Vikings stated in the hearing that this market size dictates that the team essentially can't and shouldn't have to ante up all of the money, all of the funding, because they indeed need to be profitable as well. Did you buy that argument?
Well, first of all, they're making a profit now. I asked a direct question to the Sports Facilities Commission, they wouldn't answer it. They are making money now. The team is profitable now. And why should the taxpayers pay for it? You know, Lester Bagley wants a handout. And I don't blame him. He and Mr. Wilf, his boss, would like us to hand over hundreds of millions of dollars. I understand that. But why we as public officials and representing the taxpayers should say, well, we're willing to make the all-time biggest taxpayer subsidy of a sports team in history because the Vikings ask for it. No, that's where the disconnect occurs. I don't mind Bagley and the Vikings asking for the largest handout ever, but why would we give it to them?
For the sake of argument, let's kind of go down this road a little bit, and let's talk about maybe some of the financing options. Would you support any measure if perhaps more of those profits came back to the state down the road, making it more, again, more profitable for the state, more money in our general fund?
That's a fair approach. I mean, I don't have a big objection to that. You know, if Ziggy will say he owns, I don't know what percentage of the team he owns more than his brother and his cousin and some other investors. But if he owns 50% and his brother owns 20%, any profits, he gets 50% of them, his brother gets 20% of them. They get the profit based on how much they put into it. If we're paying 3/4 of the cost of the stadium, and the state, the public is able to get back 3/4 of the naming rights, 3/4 of the parking revenue, any new revenues that the team is not currently getting. In other words, the value added by us subsidizing the new stadium. If we put in 70% of the money and we get 70% of those new profits, that's a fair deal. I think whether we want to do it or not is another question, but I don't really have an objection to it. If the state wants to be in the business of investing in a football team, Green Bay's basically done that sort of thing. I think we should be looking at the same sort of arrangement here. Even if it's not ownership of the team, sharing the profits with the state would be fair.
Senator Box did state in the hearing that he thought the votes were going to be tough to get. Do you think taking an approach where the state gets a little more of the revenue might make it a bit more, give more of the Senate members an appetite for this?
Well, I think if we get a proportional share, if we get 70% of the new revenue, if that's what we're paying into it, I think there'd be a lot of people saying, well, maybe it's not the best role of government, but if the Vikings want to do it that way, that'd be fine.
Isn't a disproportionate share, though, that goes into the general fund better than nothing? Say the team leaves?
The team isn't likely to leave. Remember in 1997, if we didn't pass this bill in the special session to keep the Twins, they had moved to North Carolina. We didn't pass a bill. They didn't move. What he's saying, what Lester Bagley is basically threatening or implying the threat of is, if you guys don't build us, if you don't hand us $700 million, then we're going to go and build our own stadium in Los Angeles at our expense, because that's what Los Angeles is offering them. You can build here at your expense. And I'm saying, you know, they're not really going to do that. The league wouldn't let them. It would cost them several $100 million to do it. So why don't we stop the threats? Let's stop the extortion kind of stuff. And let's just start negotiating on what's a fair way to put together a stadium deal. And the bottom line is, it is profitable enough. I mean, just the parking at Arden Hills, what are they going to charge? $50 a space? $60?
For about $21,000.
For $21,000, $50 a space, that's $1 million a game. That's real money. And they get all the money. You know, why don't we start talking about how the fact that if they were to build their own stadium at their expense in Arden Hills, they're going to get all those new revenues anyway. So that's a fair way to do it. No, I think the reason they're having trouble finding 34 votes to pass in the Senate is because the public is so strongly opposed to it and the state doesn't have any money.
Yet you did hear some fans in the hearing talk about keeping the Vikings here, and the team itself made the argument that they are a significant part of this state.
Oh, I agree. I think they are a significant part of the state. And I think, frankly, the NFL knows that too, and that's why the NFL isn't likely to pull it. You know, we keep hearing this myth. Ted Mondale said something that wasn't true. He said every town, and I think every city that lost an NFL team has fought very hard and gotten a new team back at 2 or 3 times the cost. Well, that's simply not true. Los Angeles lost not one team, they lost 2 teams. And they haven't gotten them back yet, and they're trying to get one back. But how much are they offering? No public money. And the whole point is we keep relying on these myths that aren't necessarily true. And we keep saying we have to do this because if not, they're going to move to Los Angeles. If Los Angeles was the threat they make it out to be, why isn't there a team there now? I mean, it's a much bigger community, but they've lost 2 teams. If it was that profitable, the league would put one there right away. And frankly, the Vikings, what are they, number 5 in TV audience? TV audience is where the NFL makes its money. TV audience, we're number 5 in the country, even with a losing team. You know, the NFL isn't going to pull a team out of here. They're not crazy. They're trying to make more money, which is why they're asking for such a huge handout.
All right, Senator, we're out of time. I'm sure this issue is not going to simmer down anytime shortly, and we'd love to get you on again down the road. Thanks for joining us today.
My pleasure.
State economic experts painted a portrait of an encouraging financial landscape. The November economic forecast came in at a surplus, despite projections of a deficit.
I'm happy to bring you some unusually good news. It's been a number of years since we've last reported a forecast improvement instead of a new or larger forecast gap. The story and the picture is one of stronger than expected revenues in prior years, somewhat lower spending in prior years and going into the future, offsetting some of the increased risks and offsetting the slower than expected growth in the economy. The state's current law delegates that money to the reserves, and so we've now got a cushion against some of the future risks that the state still has.
Despite revenues that were essentially on forecast, despite GDP that was revised downward fairly significantly from 3.1% to 1.7%, that what this budget surplus now shows is that as a result of spending reductions, and we heard from the governor's staff that 2/3 of this is a result of spending reductions and employment and wage growth, the state of Minnesota is now forecast to have $876 million in surplus. The Dayton tax hike plan is dead. And I would say to job creators in the state of Minnesota, have confidence in that this legislature has no interest in raising taxes. And actually, I'd ask the governor today to join us in that.
We are all relieved with today's news that at least for now, we won't be facing another budget deficit in